My name is Amber again, and I serve as the Grassroots Engagement Director here in Central Ohio for Americans for Prosperity. And we are proud to host this event here today at the McCoy and hopefully bring together different voices on important topics. For those of you who have never been to an AFP event before, we are the nation's largest grassroots organization. Here in Ohio, we are on a mission to move the state from the middle of the Midwest to the first in the nation. We do that by engaging communities, empowering coalition partners, emboldening policy champions towards advancing transformational public policy reform. No area is more in need of transformational thinking than the educational space, which is what we are here to discuss today. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have gathered for this vital conversation on the future of education in Ohio. And because I've been running for the last hour and 55 minutes, I'm going to have a sip of water. So before we officially begin, I would like to place a few ground rules in place to ensure a productive and safe evening. This event is designed for educational purposes and to spark thoughtful and broad discussions on key topics. We anticipate a civil and respectful, open exchange of ideas during our panel. While we value diverse perspectives and support the constitutional right to protest, we are aware that some may seek to disrupt the public dialogue. Disruptions will not be tolerated, and we have comprehensive security measures and law enforcement in place to guarantee a safe environment for everyone. Please note that our speakers and panelists tonight are participating in their own individual capacities, and their views do not necessarily represent Americans for Prosperity, and they do not necessarily represent any organization or entity unless expressly stated. Finally, to maintain focus and flow, please hold all applause for the end of the panel discussion. We will have a keynote policy address from Vivek Ramaswamy at the end of the evening, and he will be answering some questions, which I hope you have submitted on the Q&A QR code. For those who have additional questions, I think that you can still submit them at the AFP table if you missed that opportunity. Now, I'd like to introduce Rick Carfagna, who is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. He is going to start this discussion off and talk a lot about how education impacts business in Ohio.
Good evening, friends. I'm Rick Carfagna, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. Look, I'm going to keep it fairly academic, no pun intended. I mean, I don't really have a lot of juicy stories to tell. I'm going to give it to you straight, give you some facts and figures really about the intersection between the state's education system and its workforce. And I appreciate all of you taking time out this evening to be a part of this important conversation. I'm grateful to our good friends at Americans for Prosperity Ohio for allowing us to join with tonight's educators, thought leaders, and innovators who are shaping the next era of Ohio's economy. That's an era that is driven by workforce development, advanced technology, and strategic growth. It's never been a better time in history to be in Ohio. We have an abundance of resources and variables that are working in our favor, including a low cost of living and a high quality of life. Just last month, CNBC ranked Ohio 5th overall in top states to do business. And last year, Ohio ranked in the top 5 states nationally in the number of announced deals. We have tens of thousands of jobs already in the pipeline coming in the next 3 to 5 years, not including the tens of thousands of construction jobs related to suppliers and spillover retail and hospitality jobs. Yet, when you talk to any Ohio business, doesn't matter what sector or industry in our economy, they'll universally tell you their number one challenge is what? Workforce. I can't find and I can't keep good help. Our country is presently dealing with the lowest labor force participation in 48 years. At this very moment, over 132,000 job postings are listed on OhioNeedsJobs.com. That translates to nearly 3 jobs available for each Ohioan on unemployment. But we know that to confront our workforce challenges, we have to get behind the numbers, because having a reliable, vibrant labor pool means having modern skill sets that align with the needs of Ohio's employers. It means making sure that Ohioans can avail themselves of job training and educational opportunities, that they can live in the vicinity of where they work, have access to affordable childcare, and have the means to get to and from work safely. So how do we equip Ohio's existing and future employers with a stable talent pool? First, we need to align career pathways and career exposure with educational and workforce data. Let's marry together all of the education and labor market info that our state compiles, yet silos, and then put it under one clearinghouse that gives everyone, policymakers, parents, educators, administration officials, business owners, and students, a clear picture of the actual workforce demands and educational pipelines in Ohio. Next, there are 3 million Ohio adults between the ages of 25 and 64 who do not have a post-secondary credential. This represents major untapped potential. These are Ohioans that are working menial jobs, if they're working, and then they're on some sort of government assistance. These are the people we need to target with short-term certificate programs and the other means to equip them with skill sets that increase their marketability and give them access to better jobs with upward mobility. As we talk about developing talent, we also must confront the challenge of retaining talent. And it comes as no surprise at the most recent census that our state's population growth lagged several states to the point where we lost a congressional seat. The median U.S. growth rate was just over 0.5%, while Ohio struggled to grow by even 0.25%. The lion's share of population growth occurred in central Ohio, followed by the Cincinnati metro area, with Cleveland, Dayton, and Toledo all dwindling. One of the things that our state does well has been to identify and support a spectrum of opportunities for individuals to continue their post-secondary educational journey. Our higher education institutions, regardless of if they're public or if they're private, 2-year or 4-year, do a phenomenal job of attracting students from the Midwest and around the country. The problem lies in how we capture that talent post-degree, as Ohio loses 45% of its college graduates to other states. So think about that. That's tens of thousands of college-educated individuals that otherwise could contribute to our state's prosperity. The best way to combat this, to get these students to settle in our communities, put down roots, and start families, is to tether them here with a job before they even get that diploma. We have to provide coordinated, statewide, work-based learning opportunities for those preparing to enter the labor market for the first time, and we're working at the Chamber on developing solutions in that area. Next, Ohio's economic competitiveness also depends on having a technology-proficient workforce that is prepared with the skill sets for jobs that frankly have yet to even be invented. Central to this idea is the continued integration of computer science at the K-12 level. And while Ohio has made great progress in recent state budgets to address this, as I stand here tonight, 38% of Ohio's public high schools still have 0 offerings of computer science classes. 0. And to be clear, we're not talking about computer literacy. We're not talking about how to make spreadsheets, use Google Docs, how to use computers. We're talking about more sophisticated technology options like coding, web design, app development. These are the very types of courses that will not only inspire creativity and innovation in our youth, but also prepare them to meet the needs of the 21st century economy. This disparity in course programming puts Ohio students at a severe skill set disadvantage. With businesses' increased use of technologies like AI, 3D printing, virtual reality, and with emerging fields like fintech, blockchain, and biohealth, Ohio needs to remain future-focused to stay competitive. That means we must change the narrative in our education system that computer science is foundational rather than vocational. And beyond developing workers for Ohio-based technology operations like Anduril, Meta, Amazon, or even Intel, this is about cultivating a workforce for employers like Scotts Miracle-Gro, Procter & Gamble, Nationwide Insurance, Kroger. Right now, Ohio employers have job openings for those with computer science skill sets from data analytics to cloud computing, cybersecurity, the Internet of Things, programming, networking, and beyond. Every industry has a need now and in the future for computer programmers and IT personnel. And until we get serious about cultivating our own farm team of technology workers, and again, well over a third of our high schools aren't even exposing kids to this type of curriculum, Ohio companies will have to continue looking elsewhere for workers. That means out of state. That means, yes, applying for H-1B visas to import talent from overseas to fill tech and research positions. But make no mistake, Ohio is trending in the right direction. Already, we've restructured what used to be the Ohio Department of Education and State Board of Education to provide stronger emphasis on workforce skills and career readiness. So for the first time, we've elevated career tech to the same levels as traditional K-12 education. Our state is wisely investing hundreds of millions of dollars into career tech schools for equipment and supply needs. We're investing in workforce training programs like TechCred and the Individual Micro-Credential Assistance Program. We're employing the science of reading to raise our literacy rates and to give our kids an earlier leg up on learning. And we dramatically improved remediation rates in both math and English in our universities by more than 50%. My friends, there is not a state in the union right now that would trade its problems for Ohio's. We are entering into a manufacturing renaissance unlike anything witnessed anywhere in the free world. But now is the time to capitalize on this window of opportunity to make sure that we have a labor force equipped with the modern skill sets to fill critical job openings, improve the economic mobility of our residents, and enhance the state's overall competitiveness nationally and globally. So thank you all again for sharing your evening with us. Ohio truly is the heart of it all, and it's our time to shine. Let's go, Ohio. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel for the evening. Please welcome Senator Andy Brenner, the chair of the Ohio Senate Education Committee. You can clap. We've got time. I'd like to welcome State Representative Brian Stewart, the chair of the Ohio House Finance Committee. You guys can come up and just grab seats. Welcome to Todd Hoadley, the superintendent of Tolley's Career and Technical Center. Welcome to Omar Tarazi, attorney for Southwestern City School District. And welcome to Tara Meyers, parents advocate and mom on a mission. Welcome to Troy McIntosh, executive director for the Ohio Christian Education Network. So how would you characterize the state of education in Ohio today? And what should our top priorities be for improvement? We'll start with Senator Brenner. Baby.
Thank you.
It's on.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here this evening. It's been a very honored privilege to be the chair of the Senate Education Committee. I've been on the Education Committee since I was in the Ohio House, and I've served as chair and vice chair of the committee in both chambers. I will tell you that I think the state of our education in Ohio, we've seen some improvement, but I think we need some major overhauls. Let's just say that. We could probably start off with the fact that we need to do a major amount of remediation of our students. When the pandemic came and they sent all the kids home and put masks on everybody, that completely screwed up the education system. And so you have a lot of learning loss. Those kids have not been caught up. We need to continue to work to get them caught up. That should be a top priority. We have literally hundreds of thousands of kids who are behind and have been behind. Another issue that we have that we need to address has been chronic absenteeism. It hasn't improved much since the pandemic. I think it's still hovering in the 20% range statewide. We've got some districts that are still, and I think when the new report cards come out, I think they're still going to see them in the 50 to 60% range. And most of those are high poverty urban districts. It's unfortunate. I think a lot of those kids have been left behind. I think we need to improve our school funding system. And when I mean improve our school funding system, I think that needs to be overhauled and changed in a way that we fully fund every single student, but we have the money follow the student and give the power to the parents to have that money follow that student. Now, we've had some reports recently about school transportation, which I think have been completely wrong. School transportation in some of our districts is a complete mess. What has happened is we fund every single student to be transported. The state of Ohio has an allocation, I think it's around $1,500 a student, to include funding transporting the kids of school choice. That includes kids that are on ed-choice scholarships, non-charter, non-public, charter schools. But what's happened is there is a rule that has been allowed to allow those kids to be able to be not transported. And usually it was supposed to be used rarely. We now have districts, essentially 90% of the kids are not being transported or are the kids of school choice. That is wrecking school choice. I'm going to tell you, if you're a parent, you can't get, and you're a poor kid, and there are poor families, and that's where this is really impacting them, they can't transport their kids. And so when they're told, you're on your own, we'll give you a little stipend, well, then those kids end up going back to the traditional school. So
Thank you, Senator.
those are the things that I think that we need priority on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, I will just reiterate, we will hold all applause to the end, please.
First off, thanks to everyone for coming tonight. And I'm going to maybe echo some of what Rick Carfagna said from the chamber. I want to start off by just some things I think are going really well in the state of Ohio. One is career technical education, and I'm the superintendent at Toll's Career and Technical Center. And as you heard Rick talk about, having a workforce for this state is just imperative to continue progress. At Toll's, our enrollment has gone from 600 to 1,300 students in the last 4 years. And honestly, it's because we have great partnerships with our associate districts. And I know Senator Brenner was talking about busing. I'll talk about busing from the standpoint of most of our students are half day. So our associate districts are bringing students out in the morning. They're running buses at noontime. They're picking up students in the afternoon. So we're seeing an enrollment increase because we're working in partnership with our K-12 schools here. So I think that is a real positive. Other things I think, and I'll echo Senator Brenner's, on the other side of the ledger, we really have to figure out the school funding formula. I know in the legislature, and I think there'll probably be some discussions about that, there were several components of the budget bill related to property tax. Those were ultimately vetoed. There's possibly going to be some overrides in that. I'll let our elected officials talk more about that. But there's some uncertainty. So in the public school system, when you don't know, or frankly, if you're running a business, when you don't know what your finances are going to be, it's really difficult to plan ahead and go forward. I think another thing we have to prioritize on is we have a growing teacher shortage. And as Rick mentioned, there was a split between the Department of Education and the Department of Education and Workforce. That's, I think, been a positive, quite honestly. We in Career Tech use a lot of non-traditional teachers. The Department of Education has been very robust and reactive on helping us bring people from non-traditional fields into work in a career technical school. And so I think there are many positives going on, but we have to identify and figure out the attendance, and we have to address the reading and the math issues, especially at the elementary school, because we all know anybody that is struggling for literacy or numeracy, if they hit middle school and they're behind, their trajectory of their future is going to be diminished. So I think those are what we're going to have to focus on going forward.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. Are there other reactions from the panel? No? We can move on. So I think we have a little bit of time for an extra question. How should school,
Give another perspective.
okay.
So, as we think about education in general, everything involving education, it's a giant ship. It doesn't turn on a dime. So when we think about where we are right now, there's this sort of element of being reactive, of what's the problem of the moment, and you're not really, the changes, the decisions we make today, if we make the right decisions, it affects where we are in 10 years or in 8 years. It doesn't affect tomorrow and a week from now. So when we look at where we are today as a state, we rank somewhere in the 35, 38 range out of the nation as it relates to our education system. And that's just against us as a country. We're not thinking globally. At this point, when you graduate a student, that student is competing for jobs on a global scale. And everybody else in the world is working really hard to compete at a global level. we're sitting here fighting about the stupidest things in our school systems, microaggression training, whether there's enough safe space signs on the wall, and all this silliness, and we're not having that long-term vision. If we have that long-term vision, we have all the talent in the state to be #1 in 10 years. But we have to have the courage today and tomorrow to have to make the changes of alignment. Because one of the things people say, well, what is the difference between #1 and number 35? The difference is the degree you have alignment, everybody rowing together. Meaning the laws can't be jumping all over the place. People can't be confused about where funding's coming from. You can't have superintendents running around fussing with every teacher and boards fussing with what's going. You need everybody rowing, know their place. Parents can't be overstepping too much into how it actually works, but at the same time, you can't have teachers getting into becoming parents and trying to get into all this. There's so many things. We got to get everybody back on track, get all the political fights out of the schools, because they are absolutely wrecking us. We have to get people focused, energized, and on one goal and get everybody working in the right direction. That's the things we have to start from today. So just another perspective.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next question because I feel like this will have a lot of responses. Our next theme is school finance and property tax issues. What do you see as the issues and solutions needed to balance school fundings and the concerns relating to high property taxes, particularly in light of the fact that we will likely have a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2026 to abolish property tax, and where there are many other proposals out there to otherwise cap property taxes or make it harder for harder for schools to pass levies. So I think that we direct these questions first to Representative Brian Stewart.
Thanks, Amber.
Yeah, all right. So thanks, Amber. Thanks to, and we thank all of you for being here tonight. We've been in a lot of different places that you're invested in education in the state. I want to thank all of you for your time. I had the privilege over the last 6 months of being the finance chairman in the House of Representatives. That's where budgets start for this state. The Speaker of the House called me in January and offered me that job. I said it's the second best job in the building. It's the Super Bowl of state government. $60 billion of your money. How are we going to spend it? How are we going to be wise with it? What are we going to prioritize? And how are we going to do that in a responsible way? And obviously, the funding issue is, the major issue in that Super Bowl. It is every year. But I'm a little irritated after 6 months of that because I think there's been an enormous amount of misinformation, slated reporting, some outright lies that were told during this process. And I think we have some slides maybe about just math on what school funding looks like in the state of Ohio, if we can get to that. We have a $692 million increase in total funding for K-12 public education in this budget. If you include the amount of money that the state of Ohio spends to reimburse local governments for homestead and rollback, that's about $13 billion each year. $26 billion over the biennium. Now, how many folks ever saw a news story over the last 6 months that said that we're actually spending the most amount we've ever spent on K-12 education in the state? My guess is you've never read that. How many articles did you read that said we're spending $692 million additional dollars? How many articles did you read that said actually K-12 spending in the state budget is the second highest priority, the second highest amount of money we spend in this state after Medicaid? You don't hear that. I had reporters actually writing that we were slashing funding for public education when we're increasing that funding by almost $700 million. Folks, if my kid's allowance is $10 and they say, Dad, I'd really like it to be 50, and I say, well, no, guys, we can't afford 50, but let's double it and make it 20. I didn't give my kids an allowance cut. Only in government could you construe, I didn't get the entire amount I asked for as being a cut. And so I think there is some just general irritation the way that we've talked about funding issues through this whole budgetary process. I'll talk about property taxes. We have a lot of reforms that we need to do. We've done a lot of reforms in this budget. Unfortunately, some of those have been vetoed. We need to make sure that all levies count towards the 20 mil floor. We need to cap the rate of increase. We need to make sure that when we're doing these reevaluations, we're looking at a 3-year period, rather than just the last year in which your values spent. We need to probably look at capping property tax increases for seniors in this state. We have done some things this budget to allow counties for the first time to match the state government in terms of offering homestead exemptions and rollback. We have more to do. But I also think we all need in this room to be honest about where property taxes come from and where they go. I've done events around the state, and I sometimes ask, how many people think that the state government gets more than $1 billion from property tax? And I'll get a lot of hands go up. And then I'll say, well, how many of you think it's only 500 million? A few more hands go up. If you leave here with one thing tonight, please understand, state government gets $0 from property taxes. 0. Every single dollar of property tax is a locally generated tax, and in many cases is adopted locally. I've had constituent calls that say, hey, I live in Pickaway County. I moved from Franklin County to get away from high taxes. And my property taxes were through the roof. I moved down to Pickaway County. They were low, but man, now they're going back down. What's going on? And I say, well, did you vote for the school tax levy? Absolutely. Did you vote for the senior center levy? Absolutely. Did you vote for the parks levy? Absolutely. Did you vote for the township firehouse they want to build? Absolutely. On and on and on and on. And so, when you go into the ballot box and it says, well, guys, this is only going to be $13 for every $100,000 of assessed value, yada, 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 yada. We sometimes convince ourselves, well, that's okay, it's not going to amount to much. But if you vote for 9 of them, it adds up over time. We had, I believe the stat was we had over 800 property tax levies on the ballot in 2023, about 698 of them passed. And so we need to do a better job, and we the people need to understand that when we vote for all of these levies, cumulatively, that is driving an enormous amount of the property tax increases that we are seeing. Now, we need reforms. We're going to do that. Understand as well, property tax in the state of Ohio adds up to $22.5 billion. The entirety of the income tax from every single person collected adds up to 10. The entirety of the sales tax collected on every single time you buy anything in the state adds up to 13. Okay, so to say we're going to eliminate entirely is going to have effects on your local services.
Thank
And
you
I think
so
there
much,
should be reform.
Representative
Yeah.
Stewart. We're going to allow Senator Brenner to have a little bit of time to respond to that as well.
Well, thank you. In 2011, when Governor Kasich came in, the average cash reserves in our local school districts was a little over 21%. The average cash reserves, this is the holdover, today in the state of Ohio is over 46.5%. We have school districts with 100, 200, and 300% of their annual expenditures as cash reserves. That has to stop. Now, there is a good question. If you've got a high-growing school district, do they need more cash reserves because they're staking up the money in anticipation of building brand new buildings and hiring more people? Yes, I think we need to have exceptions for that. I think we need to set up a system like that will work. But everything we've been discussing on property taxes, as the chairman said over here, he's right. The state doesn't collect it, but we can change the law. And I think we should change the law. I think we should convert half of the property taxes to a sales tax. In order to do that, you, the voters, would have to change the Constitution. But I think that's something that is worth considering, because if you think about it, if you go and just have one 20 mil floor, 20 mil statewide property tax versus, some of the effective rates, 40, 50 or more mils, and you convert that to a sales tax, and the conversion would be about 2.5% sales tax, approximately. Yes, your sales tax would go up, but the people who can afford to buy stuff can afford to pay that. If you're on fixed income, you can't afford to pay $1,000 a month or more in property taxes. So we have to have a serious discussion of, and by the way, all those local taxes that are property, that is correct. But the bulk of the property tax is still schools. So if you make a fix to that, you might have a fix to some of the other things and some of the other local concerns, so that you can vote for your fire, your police, or whatever you want, or your roads and bridges. So I think those things need to be strongly considered. I think we need to really look at the overall tax funding system and potentially just completely reform it, convert a lot of it to a sales tax. Now, we're up to me and have the money follow the student, but even if we just did that and kept the current system in place, it would be much more fair to individual taxpayers in the state of Ohio. And I think that's something we need to be moving forward on, and I think we need to have that as a discussion, and you all need to start talking about, is this really the way we want to fund our schools going forward? And if you go back, you hear this complaint, oh, we've never solved the DeRolf decision. The DeRolf decision was actually solved 20 years ago. The Supreme Court said, we're done with it, you fixed it. Oh, by the way, the school funding numbers that we get do not include the Construction Facilities Commission dollars on a per student basis. So there are every single school district that's poor and has received construction facilities money for brand new buildings. Those dollars don't count on the per pupil amount that we spend per student. So those are billions of additional dollars that are spent in education in Ohio. So to get a better return on our investment, that's something else we need to do. We need to go to something to take a look. What is our return on investment for each student based on the results that are going in that school, and then compare every single school, including the charters and everybody. If you do that, I think you'd have a system where we'd have a lot more transparency. You would have a lot better system for the taxpayers to know, as well as the parents and then the kids and the schools themselves to know.
So thank you so much, Senator Brenner. I think that there would be some other reactions from the panel.
So there's obviously the voters have watched the legislators work for a year on property taxes and put forward reforms, and then they got vetoed, and then now we're starting over. And so now a lot of people are being crushed. Now you could say they may have voted for things, true, but a lot of things have gone up also. I mean, we've had inflation, we've had a lot of issues. So there's definitely real pain out there. And there is a ballot issue being collected. They've got hundreds of thousands of signatures, I understand. It's likely going to be on the ballot next year. Do you see the legislature actually putting forward an alternate proposal, or just saying, hey, vote this down and we might fix this someday or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've put forward an alternative proposal. I mean, we've done 15 different bills. Some have passed, some have been vetoed. There's a wide range there. There's bills to say eliminate inside village entirely. That would be an enormous property tax cut. There are bills to say that, the Senator was correct, something I was going to point out. There's $10.6 billion of your money sitting in the bank accounts of Ohio's collective public school districts. Through the budget process, one district said they have $161 million carryover. It's a 68% of their operating budget. They're making $8 million of interest income on the residents' money. And when I asked, well, what do you think the residents might prefer to invest their own money and make those gains for themselves? It was like that had never been considered before. And so, we understand that there is a desire for reform. We're trying to respond to it, but we do have the pesky reality of we got to find 50 votes, and the amount of lobbying by school districts, counties, townships, local elected officials against property tax reform. The residents don't always see that, but that is happening. A lot of the folks that you elect locally who you think are conservative are coming to Columbus and saying, please, please, please don't do any property tax reform, because how am I going to pay for my township fire department? And so these are the things we kind of have to balance throughout. I think there is room for much more aggressive reform. It may need to get, we still need more people to kind of wake up to that fact. But I think it is the view of our caucus is the number one issue we're trying to deal with. It was the number one focus of the House's version of the budget. It's why we came back after being in session for 6 months to do a veto override, and I think we'll get some more of those done. But I do think we just need to residents have more tools to rein in property taxes than I think residents give themselves credit for.
So we are going to go ahead and switch gears here with another question. And this one, we're going to direct it towards Mr. McIntosh and Ms. Meyers. With Ohio's voucher program expanding and many more parents selecting homeschooling, what is the status and future for school choice in Ohio? How do these trends relate to the broader issues affecting education in Ohio? What about the criticism that these trends take needs and resources from public education systems?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The state of school choice in Ohio is extremely strong. As a matter of fact, just about by any measure that you look at, Ohio would be certainly within the top 10 states in the country for school choice and educational freedom. So that's a very good thing. We can thank the members of the General Assembly here for that. We now have over 150,000 students attending their school on using a state-funded scholarship. And that is up considerably from just 5 years ago. Certainly a big part of that was the Ed Choice expansion that took place a few years ago. Now, I could nitpick on a few things on the edges of school choice. You know, I'd like to see the means testing go away. I'd like to see homeschoolers or those who attend non-chartered, non-public schools be able to access those funds. But on the whole, school choice is very strong in Ohio. And the reason that I think that has become the case is that school choice is the greatest educational reform tool that we currently have on the table. The reason I say this is the crisis that Senator Brenner pointed out earlier, and it's no exaggeration, I think, to say that we are in a crisis situation in Ohio when 3/4 of our 8th graders, according to the NAEP assessment, are not proficient in math, and 2/3 of them are not proficient in reading. We're at a crisis point. And school choice addresses the source of that problem. The problem that we have in schooling today is not a technical one, it's an adaptive one. And by that I mean, we're not going to be able to solve the problems that we have in education just through technical means. Certainly there are technical solutions that we can add to that. We can change the funding mechanism. We can even allow kids to have freedom, educational freedom. Those are technical solutions, but the problem is deeper than that. It's adaptive and attitudinal. The crisis is being caused by an educational philosophy that has taken over the educational establishment that can't answer fundamental questions. And by that I mean they can't answer fundamental epistemological questions or even fundamental ontological questions. In other words, our current system can't answer the question of what does it mean to know something? What kind of knowledge is valuable? How does one learn? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be male, female? These are the kinds of questions that our educational system is not capable of currently answering any longer. What school choice allows is a family to select a school that explicitly states we have an intention to answer these kinds of questions in our students' education. That's why we're seeing the growth of classical schools, both public charters and private classical schools. That's why we're seeing the explosive growth in faith-based schools, the explosive growth in homeschooling. Because parents intuitively know, even if they don't use that language, right? Even if they don't have any idea what epistemology and ontology is, they intuitively know that the educational system is not providing that for the children. That's why school choice is the greatest reform tool we have, because parents would now have the freedom and the ability to go out and find a system of education that provides that in the child's education.
So Ms. Meyers, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I can see it over here, but thank you,
Oh.
Robert. Thank you all for coming and thank you for having me. And I would, echo what Mr. McIntosh has said, but I also would say that, parents are the best equalizer in this entire situation.
We're not doing it.
Wow, there you go. I think that the parents know their children better than anyone else, and they are the ones that are able to choose. And I don't look at it as a system. I mean, I look at the child and determine where they learn best, how they learn best, and we need to stop looking at the education systems as a whole in Ohio as an us against them, but instead look at both and scenarios. There is room on the table for every child to have access to every option in education in our state and, quite frankly, in our nation. And I think we need to start giving parents more credit and bringing them to the table to work together with those that are making the decisions for our great state, but also to help collaborate with the options that are available. And stop, you said it best, Stop fighting over these nitpicky things and looking at ways that we can equip our children, which are essentially the entire future of not only our state, but our nation, equip them to be able to think and to learn. And it is an extreme crisis when you have as much money as these gentlemen over here suggested. I mean, that is catastrophic, in my opinion, that we have all of this money that is our money, the taxpayers' money. I mean, that is not public money, that is taxpayer money. And it is in coffers, and we have children that cannot read and cannot do math on basic grade level. That is a crisis. And we should be screaming from the rooftops over that crisis. Because once you fall behind, it was mentioned earlier, catching up out of those early grades is next to impossible. So I think that we should really be focusing on the more important things, bringing parents to the table, looking at these alternative options and how they can help bridge the gap. And you know, when I was fighting for choice in our area and for children with special needs, because my oldest, who's here with me tonight, was desperate for a quality education. And when I was fighting for that, I collaborated with our local public schools. They didn't want to educate him, and they didn't want to educate him well. But after that John Peterson Special Needs Scholarship was passed, they came alongside me and said, you spent all those years helping learn that bill. Tell us how to do better. And you know what? I threw everything off the table and said, come on in, let's get it done together, because you have industrial programs that I don't have at this little tiny school that you can provide better for these students. And I have a small classroom that can provide better. And we made it happen, and we became competitive together. We put all other things aside. So I think it's really important. And one thing that I love about this question is, what about the criticism that these trends take needed resources from public education? Well, again, we have all kinds of resources. We have increase in funding. I mean, that almost sounded like a 50%, the way you use that method for your child's allowance. Let's look at, I was taxed back in 2011, and I was said, Mrs. Meyers, if we pass this, there's going to be all these public programs that shut down because all these parents of children with special needs are going to flee our public schools. And I said to them, well, number one, if they're fleeing your school because it's quite enormous for a parent to take on the total education, you clearly have a problem with your school. Number two, I doubt that's going to happen, but if it does, come and knock on my door, and we'll find a way for those students to be educated somewhere else. And I will tell you, all of these years later, to my knowledge, there is not one single collapse of a public system or school as a result of ed choice in the state of Ohio. So that is my answer for that, and I enthusiastically think that we are on the right track as a state and as a group of individuals trying to make things better, not only for students, but also for teachers as well, and for families. And that's what we're here that's what all of us are concerned about, is the children, making sure teachers can teach, and making sure families are in the discussion with them.
Just to add a little color to what Tara's comments were about the funding, as a school choice supporter, you should never feel like you have to back down when the question of funding comes up. And the reason, just some data, right? If you go back from 2012 to 2024, the number of ed choice recipients more than tripled in Ohio. Now, if those who argue that ed choice is crippling public school funding are correct, you would expect their financial position in those districts to be worse and worse, almost to the point, how are they surviving? And yet the data that Senator Brenner and Rep. Stewart shared show in that period of time, the collective cash reserves of those districts went up by about 250%. They're now at $10.6 billion. They both went up in real terms and actual numbers from about 4 billion to 10.6, but also in terms that Senator Brenner mentioned, in terms relative to their annual budget. We're spending more on public school funding now than we ever have. This idea that they're being slashed is nonsense, right? School choice is the best policy solution, whether the student takes an ed choice scholarship or they choose to remain in their public school. It's the best reform solution we have, and it does not in any way harm those who attend multiple polls.
So we have just 2 minutes left, and this lapel mic is built for a man's button lapel and not a woman's. So somebody fix that out there, a homeschooler probably. So, Rex Stewart, I think that you wanted to say something, and Superintendent Hoadley will be next.
Yeah, just real briefly on that math. There's an evergreen reminder, I think, in every Ohio newspaper about every 6 months you get a story that says, my goodness, here's what the amount of spending has grown to on the Ed Choice Scholarship Program, and it's $1 billion now, $1 billion. Remember I gave you the math at the beginning of this. We're spending, if you include homestead and rollback that we give to the states, to the locals, we're spending about $13 billion a year on public education, okay? $1 billion out of $26 billion is less than 4%. Okay, so to let every single Ohio family have the option to get some degree of a scholarship. The rich don't get as big a scholarship as those who are low income, but to let every single Ohio family have the ability to get some help sending their kid to where they think is the best educational opportunities for them costs us less than 4% of the overall education pie. That's very reasonable, that's a good deal, and we're not going backwards.
I'll be brief. Tolls is celebrating its 51st year. A year ago, we had our 50th anniversary. And it's often said in career tech education that career tech was Ohio's original school choice option 50 years ago. And I'll share at Tolls, and I mentioned in my opening comments, we have great partnerships with the 7 districts that we're blessed to serve. But we also have students who are homeschoolers half a day that come to us for career tech education. We have private school students, we have charter school students who again come to us for career tech and then go back to their charter school or their private school for the education that their parents are choosing for them. And I hope that we can in the future not have us versus them, but we can have we like that working together for our children.
Thank you so much. We are going to have a short video to play summarizing some of the political and financial issues affecting public school governance, and then we will get our reaction from the panel.
China is moving fast to dominate the technologies of the future, producing 8 times as many STEM graduates as the US, according to the World Economic Forum. While in Ohio, 40% of our students are not proficient at state education standards, and those who meet state standards too often are not ready for the workforce. Meanwhile,
why does a school need to teach patriotism? Most of us aren't feeling very patriotic these days. Why does the school need to teach our students about marriage and abstaining from sex before doing so? This doesn't sound like representing all of your constituents. In fact, this all sounds like indoctrination to me.
Your conservative values are at the forefront of your decision-making process.
Everyone here is your constituent, and we demand that you do your job to represent all of us.
even in conservative districts, a vocal minority often dominates local unions, pushing agendas that don't reflect the majority of dedicated teachers focused on student excellence. So why is our education system falling behind? Let's take the Columbus City School District as an example. To join the local teachers union, teachers are required to be members of the Ohio Education Association and the National Education Association. Collectively, over $4 million in dues are collected annually from teachers in this one school district. Board elections happen every 2 years, so that represents $8 million in dues to buy influence. After the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, there is no limit on using union dues for independent political expenditures. Union funds and influence networks often effectively overwhelm school board races. A compliant board then gives them indirect control or outsized sway over administrators wary of career risks, which in turn allows them to dominate the district and get what they want in the collective bargaining agreement, including shifting many operational costs onto the taxpayer, like the use of school facilities and equipment, and paid time off to work on union business, and most importantly, padded raises that are not tied to performance shifts the cost of union dues onto the taxpayer. The total cost statewide for this system is in the range of $100 million of funding for networks that overwhelmingly support Democratic causes. The NEA and OEA donate millions every year, with 99% going to Democrats. The OEA is regularly a top donor for the Ohio Democratic Party and provides the financing for professional attack ads against Republicans running for school boards. Defending the system requires the systematic suppression of Republicans in public education. But they always say, it is all for the children. Let the history books reflect that this strike was about students who deserved a commitment to modern schools with heating and air conditioning. Yet what do students get for all of this expense? 65% of Columbus students score limited or basic on performance tests. How can these students possibly compete in the global economy when they cannot read or write? What do taxpayers get? Sky-high property taxes. So how do we fix the system? We need 5 key reforms. 1. Prohibit taxpayer subsidy for teachers' unions. Make their union dues cover their operating expenses, not the taxpayer. 2. Empower superintendents and principals. Untie their hands to lead and be held accountable for meeting goals and results. 3. Pay tied to evaluations. Tie a portion of bonuses and raises to performance reviews like the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. 4. Empower the majority of educators. Require education and best practices for organizational governance to reform teacher unions to represent the values of the majority of educators instead of the vocal minority. 5. Prohibit local teacher unions from forcing membership in any state or national association as a condition of membership. Teachers must have the option to join their local union without being forced into other organizations that do not reflect their values. These reforms are critical to save our public education system, fix the internal dysfunction, cut costs, and return the focus to educating students. We cannot afford partisan politics to continue to suck resources out of our public education system. The state of Ohio must lead in reform. The future prosperity of our nation depends on it.
What is your perspective on the issues relating to the imbalance between school boards and teachers' unions relating to the negotiation of collective bargaining agreements? How is this affecting the educational environment of our students?
Basic issue here is, and this is mostly in the big school districts where you have all the money. If you have a highly partisan teachers union and they elect a highly partisan board that's all the same party, then there's no check and balance at that point. You just have a one-way money machine where they can inflate everything and just keep giving it more and more to themselves. And that is fundamentally a core danger to the whole public education system. Because at the end of the day, all these people in Ohio, which, Ohio's a red state, voted for Trump, are not going to sit there and be forced out of their homes because they can't pay their taxes, so that people who hate them and won't even stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, don't want all that, and those are the people that are going to sit there and lecture us about how public education should be. This is a fundamental danger, because that's not the majority of educators. That's not even 95% of educators or more are just like everybody else. There's a whole spectrum. Republicans, conservatives, independent media, most of them just want to get a job. They're focused on their kids, but they're trapped by a system that forces a very small minority that then screams and shouts, because it's a money machine. It's not primarily about the children. It's primarily about keeping that money machine flowing to political causes. A political entity does not respond to market forces like an education entity. It doesn't think in those terms. And that's why what you see is, for example, when they have to lose a levy or something, have you ever heard anybody say, oh, we lost the levy, therefore we're going to cut back on union dues and change the leadership so we're more reflective? It never happens. What do they say? No, they put policies that punish the parents the most. And that's how we're going to force you to give us this money, because it's for the children, when it's actually for union politics, money to the Democratic machine. And we have to break that system. If you don't break that system, it's a runaway train, and it's a runaway train that frankly is going to break public education. What we really need is, if OEA, it's from my perspective, is just a mobilization and fundraising machine for the Democrat Party. If that's what they want to be, fine. Let's have all the rest of the teachers that are not part of that move to something else that can actually give us the voice of the professionals and not the voice of the people who are trying to direct things. Where this breaks everything is in the collective bargaining agreements. We need to start over with those. And that's something that can only happen at the state level, because you end up with a board, even a conservative board gets elected. You can't stand against this. You can't. You're going to feel, to make them strike. It doesn't work that way. They've got $1 million to hire people to heckle you, to spread all kinds of nasty things. And people who run for school board, they just want to serve their community. They're not there to have a drag out battle with their reputation, everything else and all that. It's so bad that in Hilliard, we're in Hilliard right now. Not a single Republican wants to run for school board here. That's by design. That's on purpose. Why do you think all those people are heckling even a conversation about education? Because they can't stand the idea that somebody's going to call them out and say, wait a minute, this is not how it's supposed to be. We need this to actually go in the right direction. You guys are trying to take things over for a political agenda, and they can't even allow people in the room to talk like that. I could go on. I want to give a chance for others, but we have to start over. I don't think we can fix things through voting down levies. You have to fix things by going to the source of the costs going up infinitely and in a manner that's just so unproductive. Because after a thing like that, how do people work together? How does it even happen? You're a conservative teacher. You're going to keep your head down. You're not going to talk to anybody. You don't want anybody to out you. That's not going to get us where we need to go. We need everybody to feel comfortable to come to schools. We need our boards. I think we should. I'm much more radical on this. I'd say you got to take the golden goose away, meaning they cannot depend. If I think of all the biggest school districts where all the money is, you just got to take away the board elections, because I just don't see how it's so imbalanced in one side. You need to have maybe appointed boards for the very biggest ones, so you have some equal footing there and can stand up against millions of dollars that can be spent to attack you and everything.
Thank you so much. We're going to switch to Superintendent Hoadley if he'd like to respond to that as well.
So 35 years in public education. The first 5 years I was a public school teacher. I was a member of the union. So I don't know if that makes me a member of the minority in this room. I'm guessing so. But I want to tell you, I was oblivious to what was going on when I was a teacher to the union activities. I was more interested in coaching basketball or something of that nature. I think that is absolutely indicative of what a lot of our teachers, I don't know about the political fundraising and the amounts, I'll take your word on that, but the teachers that I've worked with throughout my career are across all parts of the political spectrum. They really are. And the majority just want to come in each and every day and do right by students. So with that being said, I also want to say, and Omar, you mentioned, we get to drive past a group of people here tonight. This is just talking about education of our children has become so crazy emotional that we can't have a rational conversation without people wearing masks and holding up signs. And so until we get to the place that we can, as adults, come together just to have a mature conversation, I'm worried about the future for public ed, because right now, until we can, frankly, grow up and be able to talk to each other about things we disagree with, we don't set a good example for our own children.
Okay, sorry, I feel that they're such great panelists, but just for the sake of the event, Rep. Stewart.
Three quick observations. One of the things we did in the budget, unfortunately got vetoed also, was as an amendment I was very excited to include, is we added party ID to school board races. Okay. Party ID is a signal. It tells you that this candidate generally, not 100%, but generally shares these type of policy positions and these types of values, and this candidate has a different set of policy positions about it. Useful signal. Voters want this information. We included that, the governor vetoed it, we want to get that back on, and we think that is going to help with some of the issues that Omar has raised, so rebalancing those signals. Number two, if we get folks onto the school board who have a different view from the norm, who are willing to tackle some of these big issues, we can't eat our own, okay? This is not a ship that's going to be turned around overnight. You're not going to eat this elephant in one bite. And so we need to have a little patience when we do get somebody who's willing to run, who can win, who's willing to take on those fights. They can't fight 9 battles at once. They'll be relegated, they'll be sidelines, they'll be ineffective. We need to let people have the room. It's not going to be fixed in a year, 2 years, or maybe in a term. But The folks on the other side, they don't care how long it takes, as long as they're making progress. We need to have a similar mindset. We can't have Rhino Hunter 1776 on Facebook calling our school board members sellouts because they didn't fix every single issue in that video in the first year, okay? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so if we can do that, I think we have to realize too, our school boards are empowered to do an awful lot of things. State doesn't set the curriculum. We don't determine how much they pay their administrators. We don't determine whether you pay the employee share of the retirement contributions in addition to the employer's share. We don't determine those things. School boards have a lot of authority, but to the point that's been made previously, they're not using it. And I think if we change the way those elections go, if we support candidates who are willing to support real reform, we're going to see, because the tools are there to get some results.
So thank you, Representative Stewart. We're going to go to Ms. Meyers first and then Senator Brenner.
And I echo his thoughts, but I want to say to all the parents out there, get involved. Even if you're not the person that's going to be running for office, show up at events like this and call 2 or 3 friends to fill your car to bring them along with you. Show up at the school board meetings. Show up when they're voting on things. It is so important because misinformation directs horrible outcomes. And so I think it's really important to not just let someone else do the work for you. I think it's very, very important to come and find out what's actually going on. Go ahead and fact check and then get support and unite together. Support your teachers wherever they're teaching or however they're teaching. Support them and support other parents that are in the effort. And I think that you will see a huge difference in what's happening because like you just said, it cannot happen in 1 year, in 1 term, in 1 cycle, but it can happen if people collectively gather together and work towards the effort to the end.
Thank you so much. Senator Brenner, closing thoughts?
Thank you, lawyers.
Joe. Start off. Joe.
All right. Pay teachers based on performance, and you start by junking the state salary schedule. We have in the Ohio Revised Code a minimum salary schedule. That's what all the contracts are based on. They're based on longevity. They're based on other factors that aren't related to performance. In no other industry, and I'm talking industry because education is an industry, whether anybody likes it or not, it's a cartel or a monopoly because the way the system is essentially set up, but you have a state salary schedule and you tie pretty much a lot of the stuff to that. You eliminate that, but you replace it with a schedule that is based on awarding teachers for performance. So if they can improve a student year after year, but that's also going to require improvement in curriculum. It's going to require an improvement in what the teachers are learning in higher ed. You've got a lot of reforms that have to happen. If you do those things, I think we can make Ohio #1 in the nation in education.
Thank you so much. And I guess Mr. Tarazi has one more comment.
Quickly on that. So
Quickly
just
on that.
very quickly. In public education, if you've got 1,600 teachers and 1,500 of them are doing a stellar job and 100 are just phoning it in every day, every single one gets a bonus at the end of the year. And that's got to change. That's pay for performance.
Well, I would love it if we could give a warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much for coming and for the great stuff.
Sorry, I didn't know that was my turn. It's good to be here. I know you've had an interesting evening, and I want to thank all of you for taking an interest in what I believe. Oh, go this way. Can you hear me? We'll have a little bit more of a free-flowing conversation tonight. Good seeing old friends and new. For taking an interest in what I believe is the single most important issue that determines the future success of the United States of America over the next 20 years. It's not even close. There's a lot of issues that matter. We can talk about border security, we can talk about inflation, cost of goods, the economy. But over the next 20 years, the number one issue that I think policymakers, frankly, in both parties, especially the left, but in both parties, have ignored for too long is the educational achievement crisis in our country. If we don't get this right, nothing else matters. If we have a generation of graduates in an era of AI and quantum computing who aren't proficient in basic literacy or math, none of the rest of it matters. And so this is the Apollo mission of our time. That's the way I look at this. I think we are a nation in need of an Apollo mission, in need of a national purpose. And I think that hunger for a national purpose comes at a moment where we have something that would do well to fill that void. I think the Apollo mission of our time is to make sure that the graduates of U.S. schools are the top performing students in the world. Today they're not. But we're going to turn that ship around, right? You got to see the facts. You got to confront them for what they are first. You got to see the problem with clarity to solve it. And I promise you I'm not a doom and gloom guy. We're going to get to the solutions. But to see the problem with clarity, here's where we are today is 75% of 8th graders are not proficient in math. 70% are not proficient in English, our national language. There are kids in other countries where English is not even their first language, now performing better on English proficiency than our own students here on our national language. The average student in China is a full 4 academic years ahead of the average student in the United States. So do the math on that. That means a 7th grader here is on average performing at the same academic standard as a 3rd grade student in China. In Singapore, they're 5 years ahead. Think of you, those people who are parents. And I'm a father of 2 sons. God willing, a daughter as well coming early next year. Thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you. So speaking as a parent, like putting myself in the shoes, I went to public schools through 8th grade. I went to Princeton Public Schools in Cincinnati, Ohio. I went to St. Anne's for high school, Cincinnati as well. Just thinking about this, an 8th grader in the United States is performing at the same standard as a 3rd grader in Singapore. That doesn't work for us. It's not going to work for us, and we're going to turn that ship around. We're going to turn it around, and right here in the state of Ohio, to set an example for the rest of our country, to show what's actually possible in the greatest nation known in the history of mankind. I believe it is a moral obligation to our children. It is our moral duty as parents, as citizens of this great nation, to pass on the world-class education that I believe is the birthright of every Ohioan and the birthright of every American. Now, in order to do it, we have to reset the terms of this debate a little bit. And I'm going to say, everyone knows I'm a Republican, and proudly so, I'm a conservative, but I'm going to describe the failed terms of this debate 360 degrees in all directions. The debate about education policy has devolved into an accounting debate. So our friends on the left have reduced the education policy debate to a debate about more versus less funding. Is it more funding or is it less funding? More funding good, less funding bad. And I think that's a nonsensical premise based on the facts as we have them today. I was looking at the data earlier today just to sharpen, make sure I had the latest facts for our discussion this evening. And it turns out, I was wondering, what is the correlation? Right, the correlation, though, in statistics if you're taking the R. What is the R, the correlation between the funding that a school gets and the performance of its pupils? An R of 1 is a high correlation. Is it a high correlation? No, it's not a high correlation. So I thought maybe it's a low correlation. No, it's not a low correlation. If it's 0, that means it's totally uncorrelated. It's not even uncorrelated. It is negatively correlated today. The schools that spend the most money are delivering the poorest outcomes per pupil. Now, I'm not saying that's an argument to say, well, lower funding and automatically that means outcomes are going to improve, but it means that there are other factors far more responsible for whether or not students perform than this silly accounting debate about more versus less funding. Now, I promise I'm going to keep the promise. I was going to be 360 degrees here. I'm not intending to be a partisan set of remarks here. For us on the right, I am a staunch proponent of school choice because, first of all, the data shows that it works, right? You give parents the choice to give their kids the best possible education they can get. It turns out the public schools in the areas that have adopted school choice actually perform better. Not even the private schools, the public schools in the areas with school choice perform better after school choice is adopted. And I'm also a proponent of freedom. So of course, as a conservative, I favor school choice. But I think that we, by limiting ourselves to just school choice in the arsenal of solutions, we limit ourselves from addressing a separate failure in our education system, and that is the actual direct failed performance in our public schools themselves. And I've traveled this state. I'm going to all 88 counties this year. I'll go to all 88 counties next year. I hope to go to all 88 counties every one of the 8 years that I hopefully serve as your next governor. We're going to try our best. And I would say that the hard truth is, there are many parts of our state, just as there are many parts of our country, where there are no other choices other than the public schools. So we have no choice but to also make sure that our public schools are equipped to compete with the best of those alternatives. And so I'm not going to accept this. I like math. I'm a business guy. We can talk about the flow of money. But the education policy debate has devolved into this accountant debate about more versus less funding. And then our solution set, well, we have the right solution in school choice, to say that we got to go further than that and actually ask questions that don't relate to money, but relate to the actual setting of standards. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And to our friends on the left who may be listening to this or engaging with this conversation, let me just say, I get criticism to say I want to bring down property taxes. And we're not going to bring property taxes down in the state of Ohio. They're way too high. People should not be paying more in their property taxes than they are in their principal and interest repayments on their mortgage. It's un-American. It's antithetical to our values in Ohio. And it makes it feel like the home that you own is really just a lease from the government. So I've said we're going to bring down property taxes. But the number one response that I get back from our friends on the left is wait, you're a hypocrite, because on one hand, you're saying you want to improve educational outcomes. On the other hand, you're looking to cut property taxes that fund our schools. How could you say both things at the same time? And to them, my response is actually, I think, straightforward. I tell you, your property taxes are too high. Teachers are actually, and certainly entry-level teachers are underpaid. The starting salary of $40,000 a year is not enough to live the American dream. And our students are underperforming the rest of the world more now than they were 50 years ago. So it's a system that's not working for anybody, 360 degrees. And our thesis for improving the performance of our public schools is a radical thesis in today's public school environment. I think it's actually a relatively simple thesis if you think about it from the principle of just basic common sense. We are going to bring a radical revolution of standards to our public schools. I would tell you we're going to elevate our standards, but that may be too much. We're just going to bring standards, at least in the first place, because our schools are not operating with standards today. So I hope to have a bit more of a conversation. There's not some stump speech that I've planned for tonight. I want to open this up and we'll be discussing, and I hope to learn a few things from all of you as well before we leave. But I'll give you examples of what I mean by applying standards. When I'm governor, God willing, and with your help, hopefully I will be in about 18 months, okay? As your next governor, we're going to make sure that every Ohio student in elementary school, when they finish 3rd grade, is able to read. And I'm going to go further on that. If they're not able to read by the end of 3rd grade, then they're not going to the 4th grade. They're going to stick to 3rd grade. We're going to bring back what we call the 3rd grade reading guarantee in Ohio. If you go through our public schools, by the end of 3rd grade, we're going to make sure, it is our moral responsibility to make sure that you are able to read at a basic level before you advance to 4th grade. This is really important, because it turns out that if you cannot read by the end of 3rd grade, you are 4 times more likely to drop out of school at all. Now we might want to ask ourselves, okay, there's all kinds of data points. This is really the time you move in your education from learning to read to now moving to reading to learn. It's an important point in the development and education of every child. So now let's ask ourselves, how are we doing on that metric? The Ohio 8, what we call the 8 largest public school systems in Ohio, have end of 3rd grade, start of 4th grade reading proficiency of less than 45%. That's unacceptable, especially considering how much we've seen the funding in the schools that have actually seen the increase in funding actually see worsening performance, including on this metric of literacy. How do we do it? It's not rocket science. It's applying the science of reading, known curriculum to be able to help children actually read. Bring back the science of reading. Bring back literacy coaching at a basic level. Bring back the application of basic standards that emphasize student literacy. And then this third grade reading guarantee. You know how you know it works? It worked in Mississippi. And I'm not beyond leading this state, looking at other states that have had success in different areas, whether it's Texas or Florida and their tax rates, whether it's Mississippi and the Mississippi Miracle. Mississippi was number 49 in the country. We have 50 states, remember? So they're 49th out of 50, okay, in 2013. And they turned it around in a decade, not through the more or less accountant funding, throwing money at the problem, no, through the application of standards. They did exactly what I just laid out for you. We're gonna make some further improvements learning from them, but they even did an imperfect job of what I just described. And they're now in the top 10 in the United States of America, including ahead of even the state of Ohio, we must say, because they adopted the radical revolution of standards for our students when it comes to literacy. Now here in Ohio, we're not just going to stop at literacy, we're going to apply those same standards to numeracy as well. And in the same way, we're entering the era of AI, we're entering the era of quantum computing. It is a moral dereliction if we allow our kids to grow up in that country, in that world, to be victimized by the future instead of to be empowered to seize that future. But to do that, they've got to be literate and numerate at a basic level. What we're going to do here in the state of Ohio is the same way as we implement the third grade reading guarantee. We're going to set a default standard. Here, I'll be the first to say not 100% of students are going to hit it, but we will set a default standard in our public schools that 8th graders are proficient in basic algebra. Again, not too much to ask. Now, right now, we're completely missing that mark. But there's great examples of schools that have adopted common sense reforms that are getting there much further. I'll give you an example of my visit to the Greater Dayton School. So Greater Dayton School, in incredible work. I've visited the school twice at this point in the last several months. Medicaid-only population, separately funded, not government funded. It's a separately set up mission-oriented school serving destitute students coming from the worst public schools. I visited that school. There are slightly longer school days, about an hour extra in school, which, by the way, allows for greater physical education, greater time, and also for parents, a greater sense of relief to be able to not have to make arrangements for after-school pickup in a destitute population. But tailoring to each student their own actual needs to make sure that the most advanced students, even in that population, right, poor, destitute population, it's your mental model of what it would look like. You walk into school, just be frank, it's 80% majority black, the students from challenged backgrounds. It's not your mental model of what a private school in Dayton would look like. And yet what they've done is there's now students in 8th grade. I watch these girls that are just studying in the hallway. They've earned the right to be able to do that through their own performance, to do independent study. Performing in 12th grade math, collegiate level math in that school, from a Medicaid-only population that they transferred into through the application of standards, not just to the students, but here in the discussion on numeracy, in contrast to literacy, on numeracy, it also includes standards for the teachers. So you look at the licensure exams right now. On one hand, the licensure exams are too restrictive. There's many people who would be good participants in the teaching profession who are excluded by the gates that we keep. On the other hand, they're under-inclusive because if you're going to have licensure exams, you might as well at least make sure that the teachers who are teaching a subject like math are actually competent in the subjects they're actually teaching. We're going to, in the state of Ohio, bring back basic math competency standards in the licensure of teachers, so long as we have licensure standards at all. And here's actually a surprising facet. I've hosted a number of leading minds in educational policy. We'll continue to do that in Ohio, nationally, even around the world. I want to know what they're doing in Singapore. I want to know what they're doing in Mississippi. I want to know what they're doing from Silicon Valley to the private schools of New York, from Princeton public schools to where I went to St. X. I want the best. I want to understand what's worked, what hasn't. Visited the Greater Dayton School to the Vanguard Sentinel in Clyde, Ohio. I'm hungry for what the best models are that are actually working so we can set it right in the state. We invited Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, to dinner in Columbus. One of the things he shared with us was one of the schools that they've set up in the real world, Sal Khan Academy. He's the online, totally free Probably one of the greatest contributions to American education was the free application that he set up, Khan Academy. I'm proud of him for it. But one of the things he said in the real world school they opened up is some of the best math teachers who they identified were not those who rose the ranks through the seniority-based promotion system. They were people who would never have been allowed to teach at an ordinary school math to a junior high school student. Who were they? Some of the best performing math high school students, who actually ended up being some of the best and most effective teachers, more effective than teachers who themselves weren't necessarily competent in basic algebra or geometry or trigonometry to be able to teach those same students and actually solidify the understanding of those high school students by even teaching it to the people who were younger than them. So again, you think about, go back to where we started. Look at whatever the protest outside might be about more or less. Is that more or less funding? Might actually include less funding. Might actually be much more cost efficient, but that's not why I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of whatever actually works to elevate the standards of performance in our public schools. Literacy, numeracy, math, reading, writing, and then also even the education of the 21st century. We want AI literacy for our young people. We want civics lessons at a level that actually apply standards, where every high school senior who graduates from an Ohio public high school on my watch will have to pass the same civics test that every legal immigrant has to pass before that immigrant becomes a voting citizen. It's not controversial, it's common sense. You got to know something about your country, to be proud of your country, to pledge allegiance to that country. Physical education. The best way to save on health costs in the long run is to have that healthier population in the first place, from healthier foods in the cafeterias all the way to bringing back the presidential fitness test, which frankly, I don't know why we got rid of it in the first place. We have to apply standards. I'm a person who's grateful to the teachers who touch my life at every step along the way. I recently turned 40. We celebrated at the Veterans Museum here in Columbus. A couple of my hairs turned white that night, so that was my proof. But I had a little surprise. One of the people who showed up was Mrs. Hendel, my first grade teacher, who came actually, she stayed a close friend of our families over the years, but she surprised us by showing up. And a teacher in 6th grade at a magnet program at Robert E. Lucas Intermediate School, part of the public school system in Cincinnati where I grew up, and Mrs. Kinney, who changed my life. She lit a fire under my feet. She caused me to work harder. She said, I see potential in you that you may not see in yourself, but she made me work hard to unlock that potential in a way that I probably wouldn't have if she hadn't stepped in to actually intervene. The people who have changed my life, one of them was Ms. Smith in 11th grade English, who taught me that if you can't state the best argument for the other side, then you probably don't know what you actually believe in the first place. So one of the arguments that I hear for the other side, in the spirit of Ms. Smith's lessons for me, is that we want to apply standards in literacy, through literacy coaching, through the 3rd grade reading guarantee, standards in math, through making sure the default, even if 100% don't need it, the default will be Algebra 1 competency by the time you enter high school by the end of 8th grade. Standards to say if you graduate from high school and you want to be a capital C citizen of the United States of America, we're actually going to just apply the same standard for high school graduation that we do of naturalized citizens. Presidential fitness test, the application of those standards, the counter-argument to this. What would someone on the other side say? You just understand the view. I think it's a tough position to argue against it, but let's say you were. You'd say, oh no, is this just fostering a culture of teaching to the test? Right, so teaching to the test, is that the risk of this standards-based revolution in American education, in Ohio's education? And I think it's a serious objection worth at least pausing to consider. Then I compare that to the status quo. If a well-designed test is testing whether at the end of 3rd grade you're able to read a sentence, if a well-designed test is able to say whether or not you're able to do the basic arithmetic that allows you to understand the basic level of algebra by the end of 8th grade when you enter high school, then I certainly think that is a better alternative than a system in which our students are rampantly failing to meet any of those standards. And if there's improvements we need to further make to hone and deliver education from there, we will continue to build on it. It's not a one-step solution. It's not a magic pill. It's not a silver bullet. not a one-size-fits-all model, but what is missing in our system right now is the basic application of those standards for our students. And with that comes some expectation in the standards that we apply to our educators as well. And what I'm about to tell you is not anti-teacher, it is pro-teacher. May run contrary to the recommendations of certain bureaucratic organizations that claim to represent teachers. Okay? But it's actually pro-teacher at its core. I'll be the first person to say this. This is not a Republican talking point, but I'm going to say it anyway because it is true. The best public school teachers deserve to be paid a lot more than the starting salary of $40,000 a year. I'll be the first person to say it, the first person to actually see it through. In a modern economy, you can't live the American dream on that. But all we need is for that to be tied in some way to actual merit, to actual performance. Now, people have asked me over the course of this campaign, well, what does that mean? How do you measure merit? How do you measure performance? Is there going to be gaming of the system? Doesn't that mean that richer districts are going to be an advantage versus poorer districts? Doesn't that mean you're going to create a culture of teachers just, again, teaching to the test rather than meeting the student where they are? And tonight, I want to do something useful. We have some media here tonight. I want the people of the state to hear me loud and clear when I explain to you how merit pay will work in the state of Ohio. Okay, I've said it before, but I feel like I haven't been heard yet. So I want to take this opportunity to be abundantly clear. What do I mean? As the candidate for governor, hopefully the next governor of the state, when I say we're going to have merit-based pay for teachers in our state, here's what it means. Get ready. I say it twice because it's going to sound too simple the first time. School leaders have the power to determine variable compensation for their teachers. I'll say it again. What does Vivek Ramaswamy, candidate for governor, mean when he says merit pay in Ohio schools? It means that the leader of a school has the opportunity to determine the compensation of the teachers who work there. Now, when you hear this, you might say, well, how could that possibly not already be the case? And it turns out it's not the case. In fact, it's codified, both in state law through collective bargaining agreements and otherwise. School leaders today do not have the ability to vary or determine the compensation of their teachers. It is exclusively a tenure-based, degree-based, seniority-based system, and it's broken. And it's not working. And you would predict that it would not work. Why would you predict that it would not work? Imagine if you run a business this way. I'm an entrepreneur. I've built multiple, fortunately, successful businesses. I've lived the American dream at a scale that my parents would have never imagined when they came to Cincinnati, Ohio, 45 years ago. And one of the basic things I've learned, along with any other business owner in this room, I'm sure would say the same thing, is you can't run a business if you say that every employee, no matter how well they perform or not, no matter what good of a job they do or not, they're going to be paid the same, they're going to be hired or fired just the same way, they're going to be promoted the same way with complete disregard to how well they do their job. You'd never run a business that way. If you did, the business would fail. Turns out that's exactly how we're running our public schools. And it turns out that's a big part of the reason why our public schools are indeed failing. And we're going to turn that ship around. We're going to turn it around in a way that's actually good for our teachers. Good for the teachers in our public schools, good for many people who aren't teachers but who should be. In an era where we need the best and brightest and the most tenacious in the teaching profession. Our teachers like Mrs. Hendel, like Mrs. Kinney, like Mrs. Smith, who I mentioned earlier, who touched my lives, they're heroes. If it's a 5-alarm fire in our country with this educational achievement crisis, and I believe it is, then our teachers are like our first-line responders. They deserve to be treated with the respect and dignity that our society requires if we're going to turn this ship around. But what I'm talking about is pro-teacher, may not be pro-teacher union, may not be pro-bureaucracy. Local leaders ought to be able to actually run their schools in a manner that brings that application of standards both to our students and to the performance of our teachers, our administrators, our principals, frankly, even our superintendents, who shouldn't just be auto-renewed into their contract without school board participation. School board members, radical idea here, who have the ability to show up at the schools that they're governing. People may be surprised, they don't have that ability today. If you're the board member of a school, if you're on the board of a school, That means you have a fiduciary duty to ensure that that school is living up to its mission. Yet today, you can't just walk into the school where you're a member of that school board. That is crazy. It is nutty. How could this possibly be the case that local leaders can't determine the compensation of their own students? That a school board member without pre-advance notice can't walk in and actually show up at their school? It's because we've created a bureaucracy in education that has goals different from the achievement of their students. My goal here is not to blast anybody else, but all I will say is they have goals, whatever those goals may be, but they're goals that are different from the achievement of our students. So this is a pro-teacher message. It is a pro-student message. It is a pro-Ohio message. It is a pro-America message. That we have a moral duty to make sure that our students in the greatest nation known in the history of mankind are getting the greatest education available on planet Earth. And we're going to demonstrate for the other 50 states, 49 states in our union, that all of us here in the state of Ohio set standards in our public education system. We do it while we embrace school choice. We do it while we embrace competition. But we do it in a way that doesn't abandon our public schools, but actually elevates the standards of performance at our public schools in a way that shows the rest of the United States who we really are. And if we get this right over the next 20 years, when a kid who enters that vision of our school system is graduating from high school, living a life of purpose and meaning, whether it's going to college or being an educated member of a productive workforce in an era of automation and AI and quantum computing, to be able to find both personal meaning, financial security, and greater fulfillment, we will once again be a nation and a state not in our decline, but in our ascent. And fixing this educational achievement crisis is the most foundational building block required to actually get there. So thank you for coming tonight, guys. We're proud to thank all of you for taking ways in this discussion. I would love to take a few questions before we wrap. So we'll open the floor.
We actually have, oh my goodness,
You already collected them, okay.
We collected some questions, so I'll come up here.
Sure.
Do you want to sit down? It can be like an
Sure.
interview.
Yeah, we can do that. I've done a few of those.
Oh, okay, well, I'll come closer. That's cool. Space for Jesus.
They used to say that at the St. X dance, at the prom, they would say, you know, there's a leave room for Holy Spirit.
So how could you help local school board members? How can we bridge that gap between those who make the laws in Columbus and those who have to implement them on a local level?
Yeah, look, I think that I think there's a role for applying statewide standards. I do think so. And I take a little bit of a diamond model of federalism view here. Think about Federalist 10. Madison warned of too much factionalism at a certain level could cause the nation to crumble, but you don't want the federal government setting the standards for the whole nation either. But the diamond model of federalism says that locus of actually setting standards is at the level of the state, not the Department of Education, which should be shut down, and distributing its resources back to the people, which is where I believe we are heading, and I'm glad about that. But that requires then states to fill the void, because it can't just be a total free-for-all without the application of those standards either. So where does that come in? You know, we'll get into the plumbing over the course of leading and governing, and even over the course of this campaign. But all I'll say is there is state funding. It's not all local funding. There is state funding that funds our public schools. And I think that is appropriate for the state as a whole to then use that to apply those basic standards that I've described to our public schools as well. So I don't think the mechanism is that complicated. I would say everything I've described is, I believe, not that complicated. Right? It's simple in that it's not complicated. So the implementation stuff is sometimes it can be complicated. It's not complicated. It's simple. It is hard in that it's not easy. Okay, and what it requires, we have the knowledge. Look at Mississippi. We know how to do it. We're not lacking for knowledge. What we may lack is the courage to actually see it through. And I think that confronting any opponents, that's really what's good. Teachers unions or whoever it is that may come up, having the spine to actually stand for what is true, what is right, what is good, what is due to our students, that's the hard part. If we get that right, the implementation of the rest is actually relatively straightforward.
Thank you so much. Another question that was submitted was, how can Ohio continue to provide money to voucher programs when our state faces increasing costs of living for Ohioans?
Well, I think that there's a number of issues there. So, it makes apples and oranges. See the increasing costs for Ohio, it's absolutely a major problem. How do we do it? We increase the supply of everything that matters. Housing costs way too much right now. For young people, it's out of reach. You got to bring down the cost of housing, we'll do two things. One is bring down your property tax burden. Number two is increase the supply of housing. Increase the supply, it's the laws of supply and demand, the price comes down. How do you increase the supply of housing? Cut red tape. We boast about being a red state. Sometimes we act like we're a state of red tape, right? You think about the construction barriers to building new homes. For every home, single family homes, smaller homes, build, build, build. You want to bring down the cost of energy? Electricity costs are what, about 50% this summer over last year, and it's going to be up by at least that much next year, unless we get the natural gas out from underneath our ground and replace a lot of the power plants that shut down with new natural gas-fired ones to take its place and bring nuclear energy to the state as well. So just increase supply of everything that actually matters, from housing to energy. That's how we bring down cost. And I reject any premise, including for those on the left, that it just comes down to improving education to more or less funding, when the real question is, are we really applying standards in the delivery of education? Right now, we're not. And my pledge to you is, on my watch, I believe it will become the first state in the United States to actually do it well systematically across our schools. So thank you.
As a homeschooling mother who graduated from a vocational school in a rural area in Ohio and went on to graduate with honors from Columbus College of Art and Design, how will we best support tax funds following students?
So I do support the idea of allowing the funds to actually follow the student. Those are models that have worked well in states like Iowa and in Arizona. I do think that true universal school choice has been a success wherever it has actually been implemented. So we're pretty good. I want to give credit is due. There are states that are way behind us in the level of school choice. Ohio's school choice programs have worked, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect. And I want to make sure that we're going to the full extent where every parent, uninhibited by geography, uninhibited by other constraints, is actually able to send their kids with the funds following them to be able to get the best possible education they can. So do I favor those improvements? I do. Are we still one of the better states? I recognize that we are, but we still have room for improvement. And I, for one, favor taking Ohio's school choice programs to the next level. And by the way, I applaud any parent who has taken the time, effort, and commitment to be a homeschooler. Thank you for whoever asked that question. We appreciate you and ought to make sure that homeschooling is a viable option for every parent who desires it.
So that really fits so well with this next question, and maybe you answered it, but if you have something more broad, what is your definition of universal school choice?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. I think that there's many ways to get there, but the way I would define it is that every parent has the financial latitude to send their kid to the best possible school they can. You can get there with the backpack bill of the funding following the students. Makes a lot of sense. It's worked in a lot of places. There are other ways to do it as well, expanding the scope of what you might call the scholarship. But what I care is less about the plumbing, more about the result. I believe it is the birthright of every American parent to be able to send their kid to the best possible school for that unique student. That may not even be the same for every student. In fact, it almost definitionally will not be. We want to be a state where every path is open to every child. That applies even to vocational schools. Think about the Vanguard Sentinel I mentioned in Clyde. Think about every young man or woman who wants to be a doctor, an engineer, or a computer programmer to be able to pursue the right path to get to that American dream. Just as every young man or woman who wants to be a welder, or a carpenter, or an electrician, or a mechanic, or a machine operator, being able to get those skills as early as high school or even junior high school to be on the path for career success there as well. That to me is what true universal school choice means, is every parent, for every one of their unique children, is able to, without financial limitation, be able to send their kid to the best possible school they uniquely can. And it has the nice side effect of holding our public schools to those higher standards that I believe we deserve.
I think that's a great answer. As a mom of 6 myself, I have kids in homeschool, kids in private school, and kids in public school, and there is an answer for each specific kid. So thank you so much for joining us and your wonderful answers. We are actually going to have just a closing remark from our grassroots engagement, our grassroots director, sorry, Kyle Miller with Americans for Prosperity. But thank you so much, Vivek.
Thank you. Thank you.